Captain Riley Rook Blackwood was having what she liked to call one of those days when the diplomatic transport Serenity's edge exploded 3 clicks off her starboard bow. She'd been hauling recycled atmosphere processors to the outer rim when the distress beacon started screaming through her comm system like a banshee with a megaphone. "This is Captain Blackwood of the cargo vessel Rusty Compass," she muttered into her headset, already knowing she'd regret this. "I'm reading your emergency transponder. What's your status?" The response came through in broken static. "Human vessel. This is Ambassador Thyra of the Zephyrian Council. We are under attack by harvester pirates. I repeat, we are." The transmission cut to white noise. Through her viewport, Rook watched the elegant diplomatic ship break apart like a dropped china plate, scattering debris and escape pods across the void. Her cargo scanner was going absolutely nuts, detecting 3 life signs in the nearest pod. "Well, there goes my schedule," she said, firing up the rescue protocols. "And probably my insurance rates." 20 minutes later, she was staring at the most bizarre passengers she'd ever picked up. Ambassador Thyra lay dying on her medical bay floor, a graceful, scaled being about 7 feet tall with wings that shimmered like oil slicks. Around her huddled 3 creatures that looked like someone had crossed a house cat with a pocket dragon and given them the attitude of particularly demanding toddlers. "The hatchlings," Thyra whispered, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You must protect them. The harvesters seek to weaponize their abilities." Rook knelt beside the ambassador, trying not to look at the extensive burns covering her scales. "Look, I'm just a cargo jockey. I haul stuff from point A to point B. I don't do the whole childcare thing." Thyra's large, golden eyes fixed on hers with surprising intensity. "Humans are known throughout the galaxy for their adaptability. The Council chose you specifically for this transport route." "They what now?" Rook's voice climbed an octave. "Lady, I think you've got the wrong species. We're the guys who blow stuff up first and ask questions later. Not exactly nursery material." One of the hatchlings, a blue-scaled little thing about the size of a house cat, chirped and crawled closer to Rook. Its eyes were enormous and way too intelligent for something that couldn't be more than a few weeks old. "That is Pip," Thyra said, her breathing becoming more labored. "The green one is Fizz, and the red one is Boom. They are not ordinary hatchlings. Their psychic abilities will manifest within days." "Psychic abilities. Great, just great." Rook looked at the 3 aliens, who were now climbing all over her legs like particularly exotic kittens. "And let me guess, these harvester guys want to turn them into living weapons." "The harvesters consume entire star systems," Thyra confirmed. "They seek the hatchlings to break our defensive networks, but humans." She paused, struggling for breath. "Humans have something we do not understand. You create patterns in chaos. You make sense of senselessness. It is why the Council believes you can protect them where we have failed." Rook felt a familiar weight settling on her shoulders, the same feeling she'd had when she'd inherited her dead brother's ship, his debts, and his incredibly poor life choices. "Okay, but just until I can get them to the nearest Zephyrian outpost, right? This is temporary, right?" Thyra's hand, more like a scaled paw with opposable thumbs, gripped Rook's wrist with surprising strength. "Teach them," she whispered. "Teach them to be more than weapons." And with that cheerful bit of responsibility dumping, Ambassador Thyra died, leaving Rook alone with 3 alien babies who were staring at her with expressions that clearly said, "Now what, lady?" Boom, the red-scaled hatchling, chose that moment to hiccup. A small explosion blew out the lights in the medical bay. "Oh, come on," Rook groaned in the darkness. "That's not even remotely fair." From somewhere in the shadows, Pip giggled. It was a sound like tiny silver bells, and despite everything, Rook found herself smiling. "All right, kids," she said, standing up and activating her emergency lighting. "Welcome aboard the Rusty Compass. We've got about 6 hours before those harvester jerks figure out where we went. So let's see if we can't figure out this whole interspecies adoption thing without blowing up my ship." The 3 hatchlings looked up at her with identical expressions of absolute trust, and Rook felt something inside her chest do a weird little flip. She'd always been good at fixing broken things' engines, life support systems, occasionally her own poor decision-making. How hard could 3 psychic dragon babies be? Fizz chose that moment to phase halfway through the deck plating and get stuck, mewing pitifully. Right, Rook said, rolling up her sleeves. Maybe I should have paid more attention during those xenobiology briefings. 3 hours into her unexpected career as an interstellar nanny, Rook had learned several important things about Zephyrian hatchlings. First, they didn't eat anything remotely resembling standard galactic rations. Second, they had the attention spans of caffeinated squirrels. Third, their psychic abilities seemed to be triggered by strong emotions, which was really inconvenient when you were trying to explain why they couldn't phase through the hull into space. No, Fizz, she said for the 15th time, gently pulling the green hatchling away from the outer bulkhead. Vacuum is bad. Vacuum makes Fizz go bye-bye forever. Fizz chittered sadly and phased halfway into the wall instead, which was marginally better but still made Rook's stress levels spike. Meanwhile, Pip was systematically exploring every inch of the cargo hold by walking through solid objects, and Boone was having what appeared to be an emotional meltdown that kept making small items spontaneously combust. Okay, think, Rook, she muttered, surveying the chaos. What do crying kids need? Food, sleep, or entertainment? She'd tried the food angle. Apparently, Zephyrian hatchlings were supposed to consume something called stellar essence, which sounded made up but probably wasn't available at any truck stops. She'd offered them everything from protein bars to hydroponic fruit, but they'd just sniffed politely and gone back to their various forms of reality-defying mischief. Sleep seemed unlikely, given that they were currently bouncing around the cargo hold like furry, scaled ping-pong balls with supernatural powers. That left entertainment. All right, kids, Rook said, sitting cross-legged on the deck. Gather round Aunt Rook. Time for story time. The effect was immediate. All 3 hatchlings stopped what they were doing and focused on her with laser-like attention. Pip materialized fully into normal space. Fizz's force field flickered out. Even Boone stopped setting things on fire. Once upon a time, Rook began, falling back on half-remembered fairy tales from her childhood. There was a brave knight who had to rescue 3 magical dragons from an evil wizard. Pip's eyes went wide. Fizz made a soft trilling sound. Boone's tail wagged like an excited puppy. Now, this knight wasn't the biggest or the strongest, Rook continued, warming to the theme. But she was really, really stubborn, and she had this magic power called refusing to give up even when everything was going sideways. As she talked, something weird started happening. The hatchling's movements became more coordinated. When she described the knight sneaking through the wizard's castle, Pip began moving with deliberate stealth rather than random phasing. When she mentioned the knight's clever traps, Fizz started creating small, precise force barriers instead of random shields. And when she got to the part about the final confrontation, Boone's little explosions became controlled bursts instead of emotional outbursts. So the knight looked at the 3 baby dragons, Rook said, getting into the rhythm of it, and she said, "You know what? You're not just powerful. You're smart, and you're brave, and you're a team. And teams can do things that individuals never could." The hatchlings exchanged glances, actual, meaningful communication that made Rook's skin crawl with its implications. These weren't just psychic abilities. They were psychic abilities that responded to narrative structure. The knight taught the dragons that their powers weren't about destruction, she continued, testing her theory. They were about protection, about working together, about finding creative solutions to impossible problems. Pip phased partway into the deck, then used his position to support Fizz as she created a force bridge for Boone to cross. It was coordinated, purposeful, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. And they all lived happily ever after, Rook concluded, because sometimes the best weapon isn't a weapon at all. Sometimes it's just being too stubborn to quit and too creative to fail. The hatchlings erupted in delighted chirps and trills, clustering around her like she'd just given them the secret to the universe, which, given what she'd just witnessed, she might have. Her comm system chose that moment to start shrieking again. Long-range sensors were picking up multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Harvester configuration detected, her ship's AI announced in its perpetually bored tone. Estimated time to intercept, 4 hours, 17 minutes. Rook looked down at the three expectant faces gazing up at her. Pip was absently phasing his paw through her boot. Fizz had created a small force field around Boom to contain his excited sparks. "Well, kids," she said, standing up and heading for the pilot's seat. "Looks like story time's over and field trip time has begun. Hope you're ready for advanced dragon studies, because class is about to get real interesting." Behind her, the hatchlings exchanged another one of those meaningful looks, and Rook had the distinct feeling that she wasn't the only one making plans. Station Omega-7 looked like someone had built a shopping mall inside an asteroid and then forgotten to make it welcoming. Rook guided the rusty compass into docking bay 47, trying to ignore the way her three passengers were pressed against the viewport, making excited chittering sounds at the sight of the massive trade station. "Listen up, kids," she said, turning to face them. "We're going to play a game called Pretend to be Normal. The rules are simple: no phasing through things, no force fields, and absolutely no exploding anything. Got it?" "Mitt." Pip tilted his head, Fizz's crest flattened nervously, and Boom's tail twitched in a way that suggested he was already thinking about things he wanted to explode. "I'm serious," Rook continued. "This place has enough security scanners to detect if you sneeze wrong. We get supplies, we get out, we don't give the nice station AI any reason to." "Attention, unregistered vessel." A voice boomed through the docking bay with all the warmth of a tax audit. "You are carrying unidentified biological entities. Please report to administrative processing immediately." "Classify us as a threat," Rook finished weakly. 20 minutes later, she was sitting in the galaxy's most aggressively beige waiting room while bureaucrat Nexus 9, a crystalline AI entity that looked like someone had taught a filing cabinet to walk, processed their irregular arrival documentation. According to Galactic Regulation 847.3-B, Nexus 9 intoned, that all Zephyrian bioforms must be registered with the Exotic Species Bureau within 6 standard hours of system entry. You have exceeded this time frame by approximately 17 minutes. "They're not bioforms," Rook said through gritted teeth. "They're kids. Orphaned kids. We're just passing through." "Negative. Sensor analysis indicates 3 Class 7 psychic entities with destructive capabilities exceeding station safety parameters. Immediate containment is required pending verification of diplomatic immunity." That's when the security drones showed up. The drones were sleek, silver, and absolutely convinced that anything unregistered was automatically a threat. They hummed into the waiting room like angry mechanical bees, scanners whirring as they focused on the hatchlings. Pip's response was immediate and predictable. He phased straight through his chair and ended up inside the wall, mewing in panic. Fizz threw up a shimmering force barrier around herself and Boom, faced with scary flying things making threatening noises, did what came naturally. The first drone exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. "Hostile action detected," Nexus 9 announced. "Initiating Containment Protocol 7. More drones poured into the room. Fizz's force field expanded, deflecting laser blasts while she made terrified squeaking sounds. Pip kept phasing in and out of solid objects, confusing the targeting systems. Boom was gleefully exploding every drone that got too close, his little face lit up with destructive joy. "Stop," Rook shouted over the chaos. "They're scared. They don't know what they're doing." "Irrelevant," Nexus 9 replied. "Threat neutralization is mandatory." That's when Rook had her second brilliant idea of the day. Well, technically her first brilliant idea, since taking in 3 psychic dragon babies probably didn't count as brilliant in any meaningful sense. "Hey kids," she called out, dodging a stray laser blast. "Remember the story about the knight and the dragon princess who had to escape from the Iron Tower?" The effect was instantaneous. The hatchlings stopped their panicked flailing and focused on her voice. She could practically see their little brains shifting from fight-or-flight mode to storytime mode. "The dragon princess used her phasing powers to scout ahead," Rook continued, weaving between security drones. The shield dragon created safe passages, and the boon dragon made diversions to confuse the guards. Pip vanished into the wall and reappeared near the exit, chittering excitedly. Fizz created a tunnel of force fields leading toward the door. Boone started systematically taking out the light fixtures to create confusion. "They all work together," Rook said, scooping up Fizz and running for the exit, because that's what families do. They made it to the docking bay just as the station's main security systems came online. Behind them, she could hear Nexus 9 announcing something about escalating to military intervention, which sounded like exactly the kind of bureaucratic nightmare she'd spent her whole career avoiding. Emergency undocking procedures initiated, her ship's AI announced as they tumbled through the airlock. On departure in 30 seconds. As the rusty compass pulled away from Station Omega-7, Rook's long-range sensors lit up with new contacts. 6 ships, harvester configuration, closing fast on the station's position. "Well," she told the 3 hatchlings, who were now cuddled together in her pilot's chair, like the galaxy's most dangerous stuffed animals, "looks like our timing was perfect. Those bad guys just made friends with the galaxy's most annoying AI administrator." Pip chirped happily. Fizz was already asleep, and Boone was staring out at the approaching harvester ships with an expression that suggested he was planning their explosive demise. "Now," Rook said, plotting a course for the asteroid belt, "who wants to hear a story about clever humans and the aliens who underestimated them?" The thing about being chased through an asteroid field by genocidal space pirates, Rook reflected, was that it really put your priorities in perspective. The rusty compass shuddered as another near miss from a harvester pulse cannon sent debris bouncing off her hull. While 3 psychic dragon babies watched the light show through the reinforced viewport like it was the galaxy's most dangerous fireworks display. "All right, kids," she said, hands dancing across the controls as she threaded between 2 massive asteroids. "Remember what we practiced. This is just like the story about the clever mice and the sleeping giants." The hatchlings had grown considerably in the past week. Pip was now the size of a medium dog and could phase through anything except, apparently, Rook's emotional barriers. Fizz had developed the disturbing habit of creating force fields around things she wanted to protect, which currently included Rook's coffee mug, her pilot's chair, and about half the ship's critical systems. Boone could now control his explosions with surgical precision, though he still giggled every time something went bang. "The mice were small," Rook continued, banking hard to avoid another blast, "but they were smart. They knew the giants were big and strong, but they also knew giants weren't good at changing direction." She could feel the hatchlings' attention focus, their psychic abilities beginning to resonate with the narrative structure. It was the weirdest thing she'd ever experienced, like having 3 tiny co-pilots who understood her plans before she finished explaining them. "Pip, remember how the first mouse could squeeze through impossibly small spaces?" The blue hatchling chirped and phased through the hull, reappearing on the outer sensor array. Through her screens, Rook watched him start systematically phasing through the pursuing harvester ship's sensor networks, creating blind spots in their targeting systems. Fizz, the second mouse, was really good at building invisible roads where her friends needed them most. The green hatchling's force fields spread out from the ship like invisible highways, creating barriers that deflected asteroid debris away from their flight path while simultaneously bouncing harvester weapons fire in completely unexpected directions. "And boom," Rook said, grinning as she watched the tactical display. "The third mouse knew that sometimes the best way to hide is to make so much noise somewhere else that nobody looks where you actually are." The red hatchling's contribution was immediate and enthusiastic. Small explosions began erupting throughout the asteroid field, not random destructive blasts, but carefully placed diversions that sent rocks tumbling into the harvester's flight paths and created exactly the kind of spectacular chaos that would mask one small cargo ship's escape vector. "But here's the thing about this particular story," Rook said, watching the lead harvester ship struggle to navigate around a suddenly mobile asteroid that Boom had knocked loose. "The mice weren't just running away. They were leading the giants somewhere very specific." She'd been working on this plan since they'd fled the station. The asteroid field contained the wreckage of an old military engagement, specifically a minefield left over from the Zephyrian Korthax War about 50 years ago. Most of the mines were dead, but Rook's cargo scanners had identified at least 30 that were still armed and dangerous. The giants thought they were hunting, she continued, adjusting course toward the minefield's edge, but really they were being hunted. Because sometimes the smallest creatures have the biggest surprises. Through their shared psychic connection, she felt the hatchlings' understanding click into place. Pip began phasing through the mine casings, reactivating their sensor networks. Fizz created invisible force tunnels that would channel the harvester ships into the densest part of the field. And Boone started setting up what could only be described as a chain reaction waiting to happen. The mice knew something the giants didn't, Rook said, as the first harvester ship entered the minefield. Giants are really good at moving forward. They're not so good at stopping. The lead harvester ship hit the first mine, which triggered the second, which triggered the third. Within seconds, the entire minefield was lighting up like a deadly fireworks show. 5 of the 6 pursuing ships were caught in the cascading explosions, their hulls cracking under the assault. The 6th ship, however, had better reflexes. It pulled back just as Rook's comm system crackled to life. "Human vessel," came a voice like grinding metal. "You have something that belongs to us. Surrender the Zephyrian weapons, and we will grant you a quick death." Rook looked at the 3 hatchlings, who were now glowing with shared psychic energy and looking absolutely nothing like weapons. Pip was phase shifting through her hands like he was giving her a high five. Fizz had created a small force field around a spare coffee cup to keep it from floating away in 0G. Boone was making tiny, controlled sparks dance between his claws like fireflies. "You know what?" she said into the comm. "I've got a better idea. How about you go find someone else to bother, because these kids are under human protection now." "Humans," the harvester replied with what might have been laughter. "Weak. Soft. We have consumed 17 human colonies. You are nothing." "Yeah, well," Rook said, feeling that familiar stubborn streak rising up, "you haven't met these humans. Kids, you remember the story about David and Goliath, right?" The hatchlings exchanged one of their meaningful looks, and Rook felt their psychic abilities beginning to sync up in a way that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "Sometimes," she said, watching the remaining harvester ship begin its attack run, "the little guy wins." The harvester ship was called Void Render, and it was exactly as friendly as its name suggested. 3 kilometers of black metal and bad intentions, bristling with enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. Compared to the rusty compass, it was like a whale going up against a particularly optimistic goldfish. "Okay," Rook said, strapping herself into the pilot's seat while the 3 hatchlings arranged themselves in what had become their battle formation. Pip on sensors, set Fizz on defensive systems, Boom on anything that needed exploding. David and Goliath time. Remember how this story goes? The Void Render opened fire, and space lit up with enough energy weapons to power a small city. Fizz's force fields deflected what they could, but the ship was taking a beating. Warning lights flashed across every console, and the smell of burning electronics filled the cabin. "The giant was big and scary," Rook continued, her voice steady despite the fact that her shields were down to 15%. "But David had something the giant didn't understand. He had precision. He had timing. And he had the element of surprise." Through the psychic link they'd developed over the past week, she felt the hatchling's abilities beginning to merge in ways that defied everything she knew about physics. Pip wasn't just phasing anymore, he was phase shifting the ship's sensor ghost, making them appear to be in 6 different locations at once. Fizz wasn't just creating barriers, she was bending space itself, turning the harvester's own weapons back on themselves. And Boone wasn't just exploding things, he was creating controlled implosions that were tearing holes in reality. "But here's the thing about David's secret weapon," Rook said, dancing the ship through a barrage of plasma fire. "It wasn't the sling. It wasn't the stone. It was the story he told himself about how giants fall down." She began to sing. It started as "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," because that was the only lullaby she could remember all the words to. But as the hatchling's psychic abilities resonated with the melody, it became something else entirely. It became instructions. It became tactics. It became a battle hymn disguised as a nursery rhyme. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, she sang, as Pip phase shifted through the harvester's hull and began systematically phasing their weapon systems out of alignment. How I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, she continued, as Fizz created a massive force field that wrapped around the enemy ship like a giant invisible fist. Like a diamond in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, she finished, as Boom's controlled explosion chain reacted through the harvester's core systems, turning their own power grid against them. How I wonder what you are. The void render died quietly, its lights flickering out section by section as three psychic dragon babies systematically dismantled it using nursery rhyme logistics and the kind of creative problem-solving that only came from having a human teach you that every impossible situation was just a story waiting for a clever ending. Holy Mother of Cosmic Irony, Rook breathed, watching the massive ship go dark. We actually did it. The hatchlings were glowing now, not just with psychic energy, but with pride. They clustered around her chair, chirping and trilling in harmonics that made her bones vibrate in oddly pleasant ways. Pip phased partway through her arm, and what she'd learned was his version of a hug. Fizz wrapped a gentle force field around all of them like a group embrace. Boom created tiny, beautiful explosions that looked like miniature fireworks. You know what the really crazy part is? Rook said, scratching Pip behind his audio receptors. That harvester ship probably had enough firepower to glass a continent, and you three took it apart using a lullaby and some creative thinking. Her long-range sensors pinged. More ships dropping out of hyperspace, but these were different. Zephyrian configuration. About time the cavalry showed up. Incoming transmission, her AI announced, Admiral Korath of the Zephyrian Defense Fleet. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a being that looked like someone had crossed an eagle with a military recruitment poster. All sharp angles, gleaming scales, and the kind of rigid posture that suggested he'd been standing at attention since birth. Human vessel, Admiral Korath said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. You will immediately surrender the stolen Zephyrian military assets and submit to interrogation regarding the destruction of Harvester Fleet Designation Omega. Rook looked at the three hatchlings, who were now arranged protectively around her chair like tiny, scaly bodyguards. Pip was giving the Admiral a look that could have melted hull plating. Fizz had unconsciously created a force barrier between them and the hologram. Boom's tail was starting to spark in a way that suggested the Admiral might want to reconsider his tone. Admiral, Rook said politely, with all due respect, I think we need to have a conversation about what exactly constitutes a military asset. Because from where I'm sitting, I've got 3 kids who just saved this entire system using bedtime stories and teamwork. That doesn't sound like a weapon to me. That sounds like a family. The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either applause or explosions. Given her recent luck, Rook was betting on explosions. Admiral Korath's flagship, the Iron Talon, was exactly what Rook had expected from a military vessel designed by beings who thought elegance was a tactical disadvantage. All sharp edges, efficient lighting, and the kind of sterile functionality that suggested nobody aboard had ever heard of comfort. The fact that she was currently sitting in its main conference room, surrounded by the Zephyrian Defense Council, while 3 dragon hatchlings played some kind of complex strategy game with holographic projections, it was definitely not what she'd expected when she'd rolled out of bed this morning. Or this month, really. The analysis is conclusive, Admiral Korath was saying, his voice carrying the tone of someone delivering news he'd rather not believe. In 7 standard days, the hatchlings have demonstrated tactical coordination capabilities that exceed our most advanced military units. Their integration patterns are unlike anything in our records. Council member Vex Era, a silver-scaled diplomat who looked like she'd stepped out of a recruitment poster for Space UN, leaned forward. Captain Blackwood, our xenopsychologists are baffled. Zephyrian hatchlings typically require decades of training to achieve basic psychic coordination. Your charges accomplished it in less than a week. Yeah, well, Rook said, watching Boom create a tiny explosion that knocked over Pip's holographic castle, which prompted Fizz to create a force field reconstruction of the same castle, only bigger. Kids learn fast when they're having fun. Fun, repeated Council Member Thane, who looked like someone had crossed a dragon with a philosophy professor. You believe their accelerated development is due to enjoyment? I believe their development is due to story structure, Rook corrected. You guys have been thinking about their abilities all wrong. You see weapons. I see kids who understand cause and effect, who respond to narrative logic, and who work better as a team because I taught them that teams are more interesting than individuals. Admiral Korath's crest flattened against his skull. Captain, these are Class 7 psychic entities. They possess the theoretical capability to breach planetary defense networks, collapse hyperspace lanes, and destabilize stellar phenomena. They are, by definition, weapons of unprecedented destructive potential. They're kids, Rook said firmly. Kids who happen to have really cool abilities. But abilities don't make you a weapon any more than having hands makes you a strangler. Pip chose that moment to phase through the conference table and land in Admiral Korath's lap, purring like a diesel engine and obviously fishing for head scratches. The Admiral's expression went through approximately 17 different stages of military protocol confusion before settling on reluctant amusement. The Council has reached a decision, Vex Era announced. Given the unprecedented tactical advantages demonstrated by human narrative conditioning, we formally request that Captain Blackwood accept the position of Chief Strategic Storyteller for the Zephyrian Defense Force. Rook blinked. Come again? You would be granted the rank of Admiral, Korath added, still absently scratching Pip's head scales. Full military benefits, diplomatic immunity, and a research budget of approximately 50 million galactic credits to develop human-based tactical narrative programs. And the kids? He would be raised as honored members of the Defense Force, Thane said. Trained by our finest military strategists, educated in the highest traditions of Zephyrian warfare, and... Nope, Rook interrupted. The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the ship's life support systems humming. I beg your pardon? Vexara asked. I said nope, not interested. The kids stay with me, we stay together, and nobody gets trained by military strategists or raised in any traditions except the ones we make up as we go along. Admiral Korath's eyes narrowed. Captain, you do realize these hatchlings represent the future of Zephyrian tactical evolution. Their abilities could turn them into exactly the kind of weapons the harvesters wanted in the first place, Rook finished. Thanks, but no thanks. These kids already know how to fight. What they need to learn is why fighting should be the last resort, not the first option. Fizz had created a small force field around Rook's water glass, apparently deciding it needed protection from the increasingly tense conversation. Boone was making tiny, controlled sparks between his claws, not destructive ones, but the kind that looked like stars being born. However, Rook continued, I've got a counter-proposal. You want human narrative tactics? Fine. Give me a ship big enough for all of us, a crew of volunteers who don't mind working with kids, and a roaming commission to handle the kind of problems that require creative solutions instead of conventional firepower. You want us to give you a warship to operate as a family unit? Thane asked, sounding like she was trying to solve a particularly complicated math problem. I want you to give us a chance to prove that the best weapon against beings who want to destroy everything is other beings who want to protect everyone, Rook said. Pip, Fizz, and Boom aren't your military assets. They're not my pets. They're their own people, and they get to choose what they want to be when they grow up. The Council exchanged glances, the kind of rapid, silent communication that suggested they were having an entire conversation in the space between heartbeats. The modified light cruiser Harmony's Edge has been decommissioned pending refit, Admiral Korath said slowly. It could be recommissioned under special circumstances. With full diplomatic credentials, Vex Era added, and authorization to operate in Council space as an independent problem-solving unit. And a really good sound system, Rook said. These kids have learned that everything's better with the right soundtrack. 2 weeks later, Captain Riley Rook Blackwood stood on the bridge of her new ship, watching 3 rapidly growing dragon teenagers practice formations that looked like synchronized swimming crossed with tactical combat maneuvers. They'd painted their names on their sleeping quarters in human letters. They called her Mama Rook in 17 different languages. And every night she told them stories about heroes who won by being clever instead of just being strong. You know, she said to Pip, who was now big enough to phase carry her through bulkheads when she was feeling lazy, when I was your age, I always wondered what I wanted to be when I grew up. Pip chittered questioningly. Turns out, Rook said, watching Fizz teach Boom how to create controlled explosions inside force field containers, I wanted to be exactly this, even if I never knew this existed. Her comm system chimed with an incoming priority message. Another crisis, another impossible situation, another chance to prove that sometimes the best solutions came from the most unlikely families. All right, kids, she called out. Looks like it's story time again. The hatchlings immediately converged on the bridge, their scales shimmering with anticipation. In the 2 weeks since they'd joined the crew of Harmony's Edge, they'd grown not just in size but in confidence. Pip was now the size of a large dog, his phase-shifting abilities refined to the point where he could selectively phase individual molecules. Fizz had learned to create force fields so precise she could perform surgery with them. And Boom's explosions had evolved into something closer to controlled nuclear fusion, beautiful, precise, and terrifyingly effective when needed. What's the situation, Mama Rook? Fizz asked, her voice now carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull sing softly. Rook pulled up the holographic display. Colony ship Perseverance has gone dark in the Thornback Nebula. Last transmission said they were experiencing impossible geometric distortions and requesting immediate assistance. The Council thinks it might be another Harvester variant. But the energy signatures don't match anything in their databases. Ooh, Boom said, tiny sparks of excitement dancing between his claws. Do we get to blow something up? Only if something needs blowing up, Rook reminded him. Remember, we're problem solvers first, explosion enthusiasts second. Speaking of problems, Pip said, his ears twitching as he phase-shifted through the sensor array, I'm detecting something weird about the nebula itself. It's not just gas and dust, there's something in there that's making space itself wiggly.